this is going to be hairy. This is going to be sticky. This isn't going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy. Yes, I've got this nest egg. Yes, I'd like to protect it, but really, chiefly, I'm concerned about my real estate. But what happens if your kid goes through a divorce?
Okay.
What happens if your kid goes through bankruptcy? So that's where that trust comes in.
Okay, that's what I was going to say.
That's where that trust comes.
Right.
I could get on MaineCare tomorrow. I don't have $750,000 of equity in my house, but I just don't want the state to get the house when I die. Because great lawyerly advice, right? Don't lie. Don't lie. Cutting edge ethical advice. And this is the risk whether you use a trust or not. And the real danger is that you give away the house to the kids or in a trust for the kids. And somewhere in between giving it away and 5 years, you need care. Life happens. Tragedies happen. Yeah, right. That's the worst thing that could happen. You give your asset away. You need the care. You don't qualify for the care because you gave the asset away.
Welcome to the Lone Pine Real Estate Company podcast and radio show, creating solutions to navigating tricky real estate waters. I'm your host, Rachel Umstead, broker and owner of Lone Pine Real Estate Company here in Midcoast, Maine. Real estate isn't always smooth sailing. Whether you're buying, selling, investing, or just trying to figure out your next step, the path can feel overwhelming. That's why this podcast exists, to bring clarity, confidence, and creative solutions to the complex world of real estate. And fun. We all want fun. Each episode will dive into real stories, practical solutions, and expert insight to help you make smart decisions and avoid common pitfalls, all while staying grounded in what matters most: your goals, your future, and your peace of mind. Please note this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or real estate advice. Listening to this episode does not create a client-agent relationship. Always consult with a licensed professional about your specific situation. So grab your coffee and join me under the pine. Together we'll chart the course.
Getting there. Private pay is you're too rich for public benefits, so you cut a check.
Okay.
And some people who come in and see me who are all amped up about the state taking their house, I will, because I usually send out a questionnaire, or if they haven't filled out the questionnaire, I'll ask them, well, what's your net worth? If they have a very high net worth, I'll say, you really don't need to worry about this because your net worth is quite high and you're going to have enough assets to privately pay for your nursing home care most likely.
Okay.
So if somebody came in and let's just throw out a big number for sake of hypothetically, if they came in and they had a nest egg of $20 million.
Okay.
They're probably not going to get so poor, so spent down on long-term care that they need MaineCare to pick up the tab for their nursing home. Now, there could be exceptions to that. Maybe they're very young. Maybe they have a long life expectancy. Maybe they're young and they have a very debilitating illness. But if they're 75 years old, they have a $20 million nest egg.
Okay.
Chances are, even at an estimated cost of, let's say, $15K a month, are they going to spend down that whole $20 million nest egg? Probably not.
So if someone has less of a nest egg.
Right. Let's say that they're sort of a more normal middle class family.
Right. They're normal middle class, and let's say hypothetically, Alzheimer's runs
in the family. That's a real concern.
That's a real concern because when you're in, it's not something that people want to talk about or consider for themselves.
Scary.
But it's scary, and I think to some measure most families have dealt with a person in their family who's ended up in a dementia unit,
right.
A locked unit, and those tend to be more expensive.
They are.
And people can live for a long time with dementia. So you're talking about
maybe 20 years.
20 years of
long-term
care at the higher price.
And even if they have a really great middle-class nest egg of, like, say, $3 million, that's all going to go.
So I'm coming to you hypothetically.
Yep.
I mean, at any time if you feel uncomfortable, like,
sure, no, we'll just
rephrase it.
We'll use hypotheticals.
Okay, so I'm coming to you, and I'm the child of, I'm the only living child of my parents.
Right.
And they're middle class people. They own their home outright.
Mm-hmm.
They collect Social Security, maybe a little bit of retirement. They don't really have that much in savings. When should I come to you
Well, the first problem we have with this hypothetical is you're the child, right? So none of it's your stuff. None of it's your stuff. So you're set up to be in a really frustrating place that actually, but this happens to me a lot. I'll have existing clients and they'll say, I'm really worried about my parents. And I'll say, yeah, but it's ultimately your parents' stuff. So they have to decide to come see me. But that's a real concern. I bet some of your listeners are in that situation.
So, so as a person, so I'm not the child anymore. It's me.
You're coming in.
I'm coming in. And both of my parents
had Alzheimer's,
and it's a real concern for me. I'm 65 years old, and I, whatever, fill in the blank. You got a house. I have a house. I'm a typical,
you've
middle
saved
class.
really hard. You've got maybe $1 million in the bank, we'll say, for easy math.
I mean, I don't think that's normal, just from my perspective, maybe from yours, but like.
Well, I just used an easy number.
Okay, let's use an easy number.
Yeah.
$1 million in the bank.
You were super thrifty.
I'm super thrifty, and I've done well buying and selling real estate.
Yes, obviously.
So I have $1 million in the bank, and I'm 65, and I am concerned that, because my parents got Alzheimer's at 70 years old, let's say.
Right.
So I want to prepare, and I want to protect my house from MaineCare.
And I'm looking at your financials and I'm saying, $1 million on private pay is not going to get you through it's not going to get you all the way through necessarily, or maybe it will get you through, but you're going to need more than 5 years of care potentially.
Right.
It could be a lot of care.
I don't come to you the day I get diagnosed.
No, you've come beforehand.
Right.
You've come and you just have a generalized concern because it runs in the family.
Right. Because I would think a mistake that people make is waiting until it's too late.
Yep. So I do deal with what I would call crisis MaineCare planning. And the way that I deal with that, honestly, is a lot of times I refer it out because I don't do enough of it where I know all of the tricks and I have them right up my sleeve.
Okay.
So if it's a crisis, if mom or dad or husband or wife need nursing home care yesterday,
and they own,
they're relatively cash poor, relatively real estate rich, I'm probably going to either refer that out or I'm going to consult with somebody who does this very regularly for like, what do we do? Because we need to get this done immediately. We cannot wait. We don't have any runway.
Okay.
We've got to get this done like right now.
But you would prefer...
Well, ideally, somebody comes to me and it's like you were saying, it's just a generalized concern. This runs in my family. I'm thinking about it. I had a friend whose mom went into a nursing home and she was really upset because they had to sell the house, or, something happened after her mom died and MaineCare put a lien on the house. And I'm really worried about that. That's where I'm a little more comfortable because I do a lot of it because that's a common concern.
Right.
So what I would say is, all right, first of all, what you need to understand is to qualify for MaineCare, you have to be spent down to a certain level, meaning you can only have certain assets and certain income to qualify for MaineCare to pay for your nursing home care.
Okay.
So it's a public benefit, but like most public benefits in the United States of America, it is means and asset tested.
Okay.
It's not a universal benefit.
Okay.
So what can you have? Well, you can have $2,000 of air quote any non-exempt asset.
Okay.
So that could be a retirement account. $2,000 retirement account isn't very much, but you could have it.
Okay.
It could be a promissory note that's due to you. It doesn't come up that often.
Can I clarify that? When you say $2,000, you mean, is that the total balance, or is that I'm getting $2,000 a month?
No, this is assets.
Okay.
We'll get into income because income's a different rule for income. So that's a good question. So an asset of $2,000 of sort of anything that doesn't fit into the next bunch of what I'm going to say, just to keep it simple. You have $8,000 of savings, and that's a Maine-specific rule. So if you're not in the state of Maine, that probably doesn't exist.
Okay.
You can have a car of unlimited value. So you can have a Porsche, you can have a Corvette. Basically, the state of Maine doesn't like to get into arguments about the value of cars.
Okay.
That's why it's unlimited value. They just don't want to fight about the value of cars. You can have certain personal effects. Again, there's technically limits on the value of jewelry and collectibles, but they don't really like to get into fights about personal effects, so you're probably going to be fine, unless you've got a house full of really, really, gold coins and, Picassos hanging on the wall. You can have about $750,000 of equity in your primary residence.
Okay, so that's $750,000 in
of equity.
So if I own my house on the lake,
yes,
and I have a mortgage, it's worth $1 million, but I have a $250,000 mortgage.
That's fine.
You can $750,000.
Mm-hmm. But as you keep paying your mortgage, you're going to have issues. But yes, you understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So it's equity.
Right.
So yes, if you could have $1 million property, but let's make it a little bit easier. If you had $500,000 mortgage on it, then you're definitely that property is definitely not gonna exclude you from being able to qualify for MaineCare. Okay. You can have a couple of other funky little assets. It's actually not a couple. There's like a binder probably about this big going through all of the little strange assets you can own, but they're generally not applicable to most people. They're very particularized, asbestos settlements and things like that.
So can I interrupt you? So going back to the house asset. So if I'm applying for MaineCare, because we're looking at it through the lens of two things, like two ways or maybe multiple ways. But so if I'm thinking of protecting my house from MaineCare, but then like also, do I qualify for MaineCare? So it's kind of two different subjects.
Right. And so the reason I'm going into would you even qualify is you kind of need to understand how badly you need to be spent down.
Okay.
And understand these rules to understand what we're protecting against. Like what are the rules that we're working to avoid.
Okay. And so maybe you're going to get into this. So
yes. I promise I will.
Okay, so go ahead.
So let's say you qualify, and if you're married, your spouse can have a certain amount of money. It's called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, and it's this year, 2025. It's about $157,000. So it's not nothing, but it's not as much as some people would like.
Right.
So let's say you say, okay, well, yes, I've got this nest egg. Yes, I'd like to protect it, but really, chiefly, I'm concerned about my real estate. That's really what I'm concerned about because maybe it's that lake house that's been in your family for generations. Maybe it's a farm that's been in your family for generations. Maybe it's the house you raised your kids in. You just really want to pass this asset down to the next generation. What happens if you just give a deed? You say, okay, well, if I have to spend down my $1 million nest egg, I'm fine with that, but I just want to do a deed like tomorrow.
Okay.
To give it to my kids. You can do that. I can help with that. The downside of doing it that way is, one, you lose control of the asset, like we said, like with joint ownership. If you just give a deed to your kids, they own it. You don't necessarily have the right to live there if you just give a deed to your kids. So then they say, okay, well, maybe I'll retain a life estate.
Okay.
I say, okay, that's better. I'll retain my life estate. Yeah, it is better. But what happens if your kid goes through a divorce?
Okay.
What happens if your kid goes through bankruptcy? What happens if your kid is driving the car and they cause an accident and somebody gets really badly hurt and then they get a judgment against them in a high amount that their insurance doesn't cover?
Okay.
These are all things that could affect your ability to stay in that real estate, right?
Right. Those are very good points. So
that's where that trust comes in.
Okay, that's what I was
That's
going
where
to say.
that trust comes. That's what the protecting
irrevocable trust?
Irrevocable trust, which means you don't have the power to change it. Because again, and I'm going to get into this 5-year look back rule because this is the other thing that MaineCare looks at. What is this crazy rule? Get to it, Laura. So let's say you were spent down. I used $1 million, but you're right. That's probably too high for this example. Let's say you had a nest egg. You were sort of cash poor. You were maybe living more Social Security check to Social Security check, but you had your house.
Right.
So you don't have a lot of cash. So you're like, I would qualify for the cash. I'd qualify tomorrow.
Right.
I could get on MaineCare tomorrow. I don't have $750,000 of equity in my house, but I just don't want the state to get the house when I die. Because let's say I qualify, I go on MaineCare. MaineCare wants to get paid back.
Right, which makes
when you
sense.
die because it's taxpayer money, right? So the state would like to recoup some of that money, ideally, and reserves the right to do so. And do so.
Right, and we're not against that.
No, we're not saying that that's a bad public policy, but it's a result that not everyone is happy with.
Right.
So we all would know counterintuitively that if somebody like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or another gazillionaire said, well, I gave away all of my money on Tuesday. But so I would like the state to start paying for my long-term care on Wednesday. We all say, oh, that doesn't seem right.
Right.
That doesn't seem right. So that's where this 5-year look back comes in. So let's say you give a deed to your kids on Tuesday. You're not going to qualify for MaineCare on Wednesday because MaineCare has a 5-year look back period. So they say, when you do your MaineCare application, yes, we need bank statements that show what your assets are worth today, but we also want 60 months, so 5 years, of statements for all of your financial assets, and we want deeds, we want it all. And deeds they can find because deeds are public records. So if you don't lie on forms, but if you did lie on forms, you would get caught. I mean, you shouldn't lie because you shouldn't lie, but if you were tempted to, don't, because you're just going to get caught.
Right.
Great lawyerly advice, right?
It's
don't lie. Don't lie. Cutting edge ethical advice. But yeah, that's the issue. So let's say you give away your house to your kids. This is the risk whether you use a trust or not. And this is where people tend to either say, I've thought about it, but yeah, I'm ready to do this. Or they sort of say, I need to sleep on this. And maybe they decide not to do it at all. I say the real risk to you giving your house away to your kids early, which is what you're doing to avoid that 5-year look back, to qualify for MaineCare and to make sure there's no recovery against the house after you've been in a facility.
Right.
The real danger is that you give away the house to the kids or in a trust for the kids. And somewhere in between giving it away and 5 years, you need care.
Right.
That's the risk. Because if you make it past that 5-year look back, then, the state's going to pick up your care eventually.
Right.
Like you might have to spend down whatever liquid assets you have, but if you don't have that many, no big deal. You're going to qualify. The asset is in your kid's hands, no big deal. The problem is if it's somewhere in the middle, let's say you make it 2.5 years through.
Plus, anyone could have a stroke.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like these things that
life happens. Tragedies happen.
Yeah. So none of us have a crystal ball.
Nope. And so either what's going to happen is, again, depending on how many assets you have. If you have $1 million, you know what? You can probably fund through 2.5 years of care for $2 million. You'll get through that 5-year look back, and then once you're spent down, you can apply. But let's say you're living paycheck to paycheck. You're living Social Security check to Social Security check, and you're 2.5 years through. And let's say your kids say, my relationship with my mom isn't that great anymore. I would like to keep this house. I don't really want to undo this transaction and put it back in her name so there'll be a lien on it later. I don't feel like doing that. Can you make your kids do that? No.
Right.
Because you've given it away. That was the whole trick. If you own it or if you retain the right to take it back, MaineCare will say, well, great, you're rich. You have this wonderful asset.
Right.
And so it won't be exempt anymore. So that's the risk to the person doing this planning. Now, some people are comfortable with that risk because they say, I'm in great health. I think I'm going to make it past 5 years. My kids are great. I don't think they're going to do that. But legally, they need to understand, and I'm a little heavy-handed about this. I might be more heavy-handed than some other attorneys are. I just like to tell people what's the absolute worst thing that could happen.
Right.
That's the worst thing that could happen. You give your asset away. You need the care. You don't qualify for the care because you gave the asset away. And I've had to tell somebody that it was not the older person, him or herself. It was a family member who was concerned for them.
Okay.
And they said, my parent gave away this land to my sibling.
Right.
Because she wanted to give it to her. My sibling has since sold the land and spent all of the money. It's been, call it 3 years.
Yeah.
My mom lives from check to check.
Right.
What do we do? And I said, I don't think there's much you can do. He says, well, the state's not going to pick up the tab. I said, you can try, and I referred them out to somebody who does appeals and said, well, maybe you could make some argument that this wasn't done in contemplation of qualifying for benefits, but this is going to be hairy. This is going to be sticky. This isn't going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy.
So what happens in that case, just to boil it down, well, not really, but
just to sort of make it more mechanical?
Or just like to make it like just, if someone gives their you know, real estate to their children, their primary residence,
right,
or
any real estate, right,
with the idea that they want to protect the real estate and have it go to the kids and protect it from MaineCare, but they get on MaineCare 2.5 years, 3 years, 4 years in, and they still have this block of time that they're on MaineCare, or that they can't.
They're not going to qualify. They're going to.
They don't qualify.
So either you wind up undoing the transaction, which I haven't knock on wood, I haven't had somebody have to come to my office to do that.
Okay.
Where they said, well, we set this all up, but we just can't get through the look back. Because usually I'll say, let's try to get through the look back. Let's say an easier case would be like, we've made it 4 years and 11 months.
Okay.
Pass the hat, kids. Like, pass the hat around. Try to fund another month of care for your mom, and then apply for MaineCare. But if you can't pass the hat around long enough, then the kids' options are undo the transfer so that mom can get the care she needs. So basically, give the house back to mom.
So then the MaineCare at that point could put a lien on the house.
They could after she dies.
Okay.
But she'll qualify for care.
Okay.
So that's not the worst thing. The worst thing would be if the kids are uncooperative and they're not going to do that. They're not going to undo the transfer because legally they don't have to.
Okay.
Because again, legally, if I said, but to the owner of the house, if the trust said like, but I have the right to retake the house whenever I want, MaineCare would say, well, you have the right to take back your house whenever you want, so it's your house.
Okay.
So we have the right to put a lien on it whenever we want. So that's kind of the rub. So that's why I say the worst thing that could happen is you've given the asset away, and the person you gave it to, even though you trusted that, even though on paper they have no obligation to do the right thing and take care of you, for whatever reason they change their mind and decide not to do the right thing.
Okay.
That would be a very uncomfortable situation.
Very uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable. Does that happen? Again, I have not run into somebody who's been in that situation. It's just the worst possible thing that I could think of happening for that person who's given away the asset. More commonly, I either see we've only gotten maybe a year through the look back.
Okay.
And now what do we do? Well, we don't have enough money. We can't pass the hat around and privately pay for mom's care to get past this. We can't buy it.
Right.
None of us can buy, maybe there's multiple kids. We can't give her fair market value, because that's the other trick. That's a cool trick, because the state only cares about gifts, which are transfers for less than fair market value. So sometimes another way to get out of this situation, maybe mom and dad have done this gift, or mom has done this gift, and the kids are going, oh geez, it's not quite enough. Well, they own the house. Maybe they can maybe if they own it free and clear, maybe they can get a mortgage or a home equity line, or they can find some way, or they can buy it out and use a mortgage and then give mom and dad that money, and then mom and dad, or maybe they don't give it to mom and dad, maybe they just pay for mom and dad's care for a certain period of time until they get past that look back.
Yeah, that happened with me with my grandparents.
Oh, it did.
I bought their house, so it was fair market value.
Right.
So then there was no
There's no look back. There's no transfer penalty. There's no nothing. There's no problem, because it's fair market value. The elder person's getting the money. The other person's getting the property. It doesn't matter that they're related. If it's fair market value, it's fair market value. Nobody's getting hurt. The state's not injured.
Very good.
Very good. And so there are some creative things that and again, this doesn't fit for everybody, but a sale like you're talking about, just a straight sale. They sold it, I bought it.
Right.
Fair market value, we had it appraised, bought it for the appraised value, boom, all done. There are some other ways to do it that maybe have a little more risk than that, because sometimes people say, well, I don't know if my kid could get a bank loan, or I don't want them to have to pay what they would pay for a bank loan. So I want to do a private mortgage. I want to hold the paper. That is not bad necessarily. That is still fair market value. But when you, the elderly person, not elderly, nobody wants to be called an elderly person, but when you, the person who might apply for MaineCare someday, hold the paper, you have a private mortgage due to you. Well, that's a negative on your kid's balance sheet or your grandkid's balance sheet, but it's a positive on yours.
Right.
It's an asset. So the state will say, well, you're very rich because you have this huge note. They're not going to look at it as a monthly income. They're going to look at it, the full value of the note. So either you sell the note, which I have helped people do. You find lenders who want to buy the note.
I've never thought of that.
And you sell the note and you get the cash. Now, your loved one now has to pay that new lender.
Right.
you're not going to get the face value of the note when you sell the note.
Okay.
Nobody's going to pay you the face value of that note for that note because there's a risk of non-collection.
Okay.
So they're going to pay something, but it's not going to, if there's a bad payment history, that's going to affect it. So you're not going to get the face value of the note, but you'll get cash, which is better than no cash, assuming that's what you were expecting you were going to get with some money.
And if you're in a desperate situation,
it's
helpful.
It's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the other way that you can deal with that, maybe you don't sell the note, maybe you tell your kid, your grandkid who bought it, say, you go out and get a conventional mortgage, do a refi.
Okay.
And I'll get cash.
Right.
You'll pay me off, and you'll now owe it to the local lender that you like much better than this nameless, faceless lender that's in the business of buying notes.
Okay.
That's far away and isn't in Maine, because they usually aren't. So that's a way to resolve that. The other thing that I've seen, which is, to me as a lawyer, maybe to you as a real estate agent, is very interesting, but it's very rare. So I don't know how often it's going to come up for the listeners.
Okay.
But let's say you have been living in your home for a very, very long time in a gorgeous neighborhood that everybody loves, and you've got these wonderful neighbors next door, and they've always said, if you ever were to sell your home, I sure hope you would come and tell me, because I would love to buy it. Okay. I hope you would come to me first, because I'd really love to buy it. Which happens sometimes. So let's say you did go to them and you say, I'd really love to sell this house to you because I know you would take care of it, but I need to live in this house until I pass on, or until I can't stay here anymore. So I need the money now, but I kind of need to stay in the house.
A life estate.
Yes. And so really interestingly, for me as a lawyer, I have now done more than one transaction like that, where the buyer is buying the property subject to the seller's life estate. So at the end of the process, the seller retains the right to live in the house.
Mm-hmm.
The buyer has bought the house, so they own title to the house, but subject to the life estate. So the buyer can't move in. So it's not going to be for everybody, right? Because the buyer can't move in. Obviously, the seller is still living there, still has the right to live there, has the only right to live there.
Right.
But for certain people, it works. People who have a high degree of trust in one another, have known each other for a long time.
Right.
It's gone really surprisingly well. Like, I can see as a lawyer, I'm like, ooh, well, this could happen. Here's the risk, depending on who I represent. If I represent the buyer, I'm like, well, if she doesn't maintain the property, that's a risk for you, because you'd have to prove that she's violated the terms of her life estate. And if I'm representing the seller, I'm like, hey, this person could get you out of here if you violate the terms of your life estate, and that could be a problem with you. Again, when it's two people who already have a high degree of trust in one another and have a good relationship, I've seen it work really, really well, because now that person who lives there has cash that helps them stay in and maintain their home.
And I've seen it happen, and I haven't seen it happen in that situation, but I've seen it happen if a property has two dwellings on it.
Oh, yes. Yep.
There's a carriage house with an apartment.
Yes.
And then there's the house.
The big house.
Right, the big house. And then
I think one of my colleagues did a transaction like that. I don't know if we're thinking of the same transaction.
But there's life estate
over the carriage house.
Right.
Or the in-law apartment.
And there are tricky things that come into play with anything like that.
Sure.
Especially if you're going to resell the property if you're the person who bought it. That can be very tricky. But it could be a solution to a person who is trying to protect themselves.
And they need the cash. And they want to age in their home.
Right.
So that's certainly better, I think, for most people than the other thing that people will see ads for, which is the reverse mortgage.
Oh, that's another thing.
The reverse mortgage, which I am skeptical of. I have seen them work, but again, you have to understand what you're getting into and know what you're buying when you enter into that bargain.
And you also have to, I've seen it happen where someone has multiple deeds, and instead of just putting the deed that is for the house itself, for the reverse mortgage, they've merged all their deeds.
Oh.
And they put the whole thing.
And that's not what they intended?
It's not what they intended.
That's not good.
But it's tricky when you want to sell a part of it.
Yes, you have to get the blessing of the lender.
Which is almost impossible.
Right, because they don't want to do that. They don't budge.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with the reverse mortgage. So the ideal reverse mortgage person would be somebody who says, I have no emotional or sentimental attachment to this house. My family has no sentimental attachment to this house. Let's say it's somebody who moved up to Maine. They said, oh, I'm going to buy a condo in Maine. I'm going to retire here. I've always wanted to retire in Maine. I've got this little condo or this sort of cute little house, but it's nothing, it's just a nice little house for me, but I have no great emotional investment in it.
Right.
And I want to stay here for as long as possible. My kids live really far away. They're not going to be able to come by and check on me. I need cash so I can stay in my cute little retirement home that I love.
Right.
I don't want to budge, but I need more money.
Right.
Yeah, think about her. That might be okay. I might be comfortable. Okay. That might be okay because you're going to suck the equity out of that little house, and your family's probably not going to be able to redeem the mortgage.
Right.
Because they're gonna have a quick redemption period, which means the quick time when they can buy that house out of your estate or buy it, basically get rid of the reverse mortgage so that they can own the house.
Right.
But you might not care. They might not care. They say, fine, let the lender have it. No big deal. The only reason that you might want to be judicious before you jump into it, you say, oh, that sounds just like me. I'm going to go out right now and I'm going to do this. Take a deep breath.
Yes.
And talk with a financial planner, because maybe the money that they're offering isn't as good as something else you could do with your money, depending on how your finances are set up, because what they give you for a cash benefit isn't always the best bargain for your money, depending on what your financial circumstances are.
Exactly.
So maybe you would be better off doing something different. So before just jumping into it and saying, wow, what a great deal, shop around, get some financial advice. That's financial information, not legal information.
Right.
So I can't really give financial advice, but I can tell people to go get financial advice.
Right, exactly.
Because maybe it's the best option available to that person, or maybe it's not.
Right. Exactly.
But where I get sad for people is people who expected that their kid would be able to buy or redeem out the reverse mortgage.
Right.
And they pass on, and that's really not a possibility for the family. And everybody's expectations are dashed. That's a sad situation.
Or if you have two people who do the reverse mortgage together and one person unexpectedly dies.
Right. Is that going to trigger it?
Right. Is that other person, are they going to, if they're far away from the kids, are they going to want to stay there?
Right.
Or will they want to move closer to their children?
That's another great consideration, because I've usually only done it with one person. But you're right, if you've got a husband and wife or two sort of life partners, again, you really need to understand the detail of what you're getting into before you sign on the dotted line.
Exactly.
Because it's not right for everyone. I would say it's probably wrong for more people than it is right.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that it's never right.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered MaineCare.
I think so. We didn't cover MaineCare penalties. That's the only other thing I didn't get into, because people say, well, there's a penalty if I give stuff away, and they think it's like $1 penalty that they have to pay, but it's actually just the state denying care for a certain amount of time. That's what the penalty is. So it's still very real and can have devastating financial consequences, because they're saying we're not going to pay for your nursing home care.
So you get billed monthly for nursing
Correct.
care. They can say you have a 12-month penalty or you have a 3-year penalty.
Yeah, so let's say the cost of care, just for easy math, let's say the cost of care was $10,000 a month.
Okay.
And let's say you otherwise qualified, but just like 2 months before you need to go into the nursing home, you felt really bad for your grandkid and you gave them $3,000 for a down payment on the house because you loved him so much. You were just like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'll take the risk. And then darn, you had an adverse health event and you need the nursing home care. And you wind up applying. They're going to say, well, you otherwise qualify. You meet all these criteria. You only have about $10,000 of that $2,000 plus $8,000 in savings. Your house isn't you don't have more than $750,000 of equity in your home. But you have given away this $3,000 gift in the last 5 years. We are going to calculate a penalty of 3 months. So it'll be 3 months before we pick up your nursing home care.
Okay.
So somebody's got to figure out how to pay for 3 months.
Okay.
Or there's going to be a debt from the nurse, or maybe you're already in the nursing home for some reason. Maybe you've already been transferred to one, which is happening less and less if MaineCare hasn't been approved.
Right.
And they haven't already started some private pay. But again, let's say you had a little private pay,
right.
You were able to make it go for a little bit. You still might get disqualified for a small period of time. That's kind of worth it. But if you give away a house that's worth $500,000, that penalty is going to be big.
Right.
That's going to be a long time where they're not picking up the tab.
Okay.
Yeah.
This just triggered another question, but I don't know if we should get into it.
Okay.
And so, if you have a husband and a wife, and it's in just one person's name, so and that the wife gives the husband gives the wife a life estate, but then the husband has to go to the nursing home. That MaineCare can still.
So what you would probably do in that case is, good question. Transfers between spouses are exempt.
Okay.
So spouses can transfer, because MaineCare and Medicaid generally looks at spouses as one unit. That's why the sick spouse can only have so many assets, and why the healthy spouse or the community spouse can have about $175,000 of other assets.
Okay.
The house, if you put it in joint names, that's not going to be a problem.
Okay.
For the purposes of them qualifying. And MaineCare doesn't tend to enforce the lien. So let's say the husband passes away before the wife passes away.
Mm-hmm.
Will MaineCare say, "Oh, well, we got to get that money. It's too bad for the widow. She's living in there, but we got to get paid." They don't do that. Now, Could they do that? Yes. Have they ever done that? No, not really. They have not. But could they? Yes. But they never have. They tend not to like to go after the spouse that's living in the home after the sick spouse has died.
Okay.
Sometimes they just, and if then the healthy spouse passes away and MaineCare has never filed a lien, never done the process to put a lien on the property, that's what happened.
Okay.
Would I tell people to plan on that? No. But can I say that it's never happened before? Also no. Like, it does happen from time to time, where it's just unclear if MaineCare is ever going to enforce their rights about what the state paid for the husband's care, because they didn't pursue it when the husband died. The wife survived. She had title. She dies. She never goes into a nursing home. She doesn't have any. They had notice when the husband died that he died.
Right.
It's kind of a weird situation. It's one of those situations where I'd be like, well, come and see me.
Right.
Let's talk it through and make sure that you're protected and you can convey clean title. But I know that happens.
Okay.
I know that it does happen. I'm not saying you should plan on it happening. I'm not saying it's like a bulletproof MaineCare strategy. It certainly isn't.
Right.
They certainly do have the right to come after those funds, but sometimes they just don't. So sometimes people sit on their rights. It does happen.
Yes. Well, you've been so amazing.
Oh, thanks,
Laura.
Rachel. It's been lovely it's lovely to be your guest.
It's very lovely. We've covered
a lot.
We've covered taxes. You've done an amazing job. We've covered trusts. We've covered a lot about elder care in that conversation, which is something that you cover. And we've covered MaineCare considerations.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot. We didn't really get into probate, but I don't know that we need to. Maybe we can reconvene.
We can save that for another time.
Okay, because we could dive more deeply into all of these topics. These are like endless.
They are. Well, they do have an end eventually, but I can talk about them for a pretty long time. But long story short, probate in Maine, I don't think it's that bad.
Okay.
In some states, I would probably wind up giving different advice to people about probate.
Okay.
If they lived in Florida or they lived in New Hampshire, where the wait times are really long to get the probate started.
Right.
In Maine, it's about 2 weeks from the date you file the application to the day that the application is approved.
Okay.
So that's not that bad of a, but it's still a court process. It can be intimidating for people. I'm not saying that probate avoidance isn't great. It can be fine for a lot of people, but for the I'll pick on a popular group here. For the fisherman who hates paperwork, maybe a simple will is fine for him.
Okay.
Maybe a simple will is fine, and if his family has to go through probate, that's probably okay.
Okay.
It's probably meets his expectations. It's probably fine.
Okay, so the next time we talk, if that happens, we should talk about probate and how you can avoid it. Things like that.
We can talk about how property passes at death, and
okay.
We can talk about all the ways that you've already done estate planning that you didn't think of.
Okay.
And some ways that you might need to do some estate planning.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming. coming. You've been excellent. And thank you so much for listening to the Lone Pine Real Estate Podcast and Radio Show. We really appreciate it. And again, I just want to say this in no way creates a client agent or client attorney relationship. This is not advice. This is just information. So thank you so much for listening.